Good morning. Well, that's another little bit of a non-traditional introduction in a Universalist church. My friend gets up and says, "Looking forward to hearing you, Charles." And the tradition I grew up in, they had a preparation hymn and all of that kind of thing. But this is the Universalist church, and Universalists are known for being different, and that's different. I love I came in the back way this time. I was here a number of years ago, and I came in the front. I'm just delighted I came through the back part because it's beautiful out here. The circle, what's the circle for?
Labyrinth.
The labyrinth, okay. What's meditation labyrinth? Everything is just beautiful here. I'm looking up at the people sitting up there in I guess the rafters or the balcony. Sitting. The church is beautiful. You can't miss it. It's unique. It's very unique. But I have visited Universalist churches for several years, and I've spoken at a number of them. I spoke here a number of years ago. I've spoken at the one in Sarasota, the one in Bradenton. Some of you might know Don Thompson, who was a very good friend of mine. He was a member of the Universalist Church in Bradenton. And I grew up Missionary Baptist, and I said, there must be something really different about me. Grew up in a fundamentalist Baptist church, and these Universalists keep reaching out to me to come speak at the church. And I love it. I just love the fellow. I love the spirit of the Universalist church. And I was trying to think a moment ago of this comical piece that a gentleman got up one morning and said as it relates to Universalists. I think he said something to the effect that at the day of judgment, he said, you'll find one group of people, the Universalists over there with no place to go. And there's a lot, and I'll just give you this one. This little girl was in a class and she was drawing a picture. And the teacher asked her, well, what are you drawing a picture of? She says, I'm drawing a picture of God. And the teacher said, but nobody knows what God looks like. She said, well, just hold on a minute, they will. That's the Universalist spirit. It is indeed the Universalist spirit, and I love it. I thought about this song as I was sitting in the back, and I could see Dr. King standing at the Riverside Church, and some of you are familiar with the Riverside speech. And then there was a flashback of him at his home church in Atlanta at Ebenezer when he was talking about the Vietnam War. And he ended his sermon that day with, I ain't gonna study war no more. So if you want to, you can join me in singing a little bit of Gonna Lay Down My Sword and Shield down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside. War no more. Well, I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Well, I ain't gonna study war no more. Study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Wonderful. And I know we all in this building this morning, I believe, look forward to the day when men and women will beat their swords into plowshares. And their spears into pruning hooks. and study war no more. Thank you. Thank you, Russ. This morning, I want to talk with you as capably as I can and as briefly as possible about something called courage and its multidimensional meaning in our lives. There are some synonyms to courage: audacity, bravery, daring, endurance, determination, fortitude. All these synonymous words describe something that we, for the most part, have decided is of high value in the human experience: courage. Courage is something that we consider to be the stuff of which heroes and sheroes are made. Of course, when we look around at the political landscape in our nation today and other parts of the world, we might conclude that it is a commodity which is in very rare quantities in our political domain. And it appears that political expediency has, to use the word not to berate anyone, but trumped a desirable and practicable commodity. I would go so far as to assert that this thing we call courage is needed to address the critical issues of our nation and our world. I think it was Dr. King who said, the true measure of a human being is not where that individual stands in times of comfort and convenience, but in times of great controversy. And I'm reminded of this man who stood in Riverside Church one night to speak out against what he considered an unjust and violent and very, very unnecessary war in Southeast Asia. And anyone who has read the Riverside speech and has done any research regarding the responses and the outcome of that speech realize that it took a lot of courage to make that kind of a statement at a time in our country when about half the population supported the war. And over time, that number dwindled. But he refused to adjust to the status quo for the sake of comfort and convenience. And I believe there's a dimension to courage that flows against the current. It stands up sometimes against what is popularly held or what is the dominant thought pattern and says, I march to the sound of a different drummer. It calls upon our individual and collective existence to sometimes move against the current and to do as Henry David Thoreau did as it relates to the Spanish-American War. He was in jail because he protested that war. And his friend, I believe, Ralph Waldo Emerson, I believe was the man who visited him in prison. And he asked Thoreau, and anybody who's read Thoreau or been introduced to Walden Pond, and as I was passing through the back, it kind of reminded me of the whole theme of Walden Pond. He said to Thoreau, he said, "Why are you in there?" And Thoreau's inimitable reply was, the question is not why am I in here? But at a time like this, why are you out there? Courage. And this is indeed a time, I believe, for courageous men and women in the social sphere, within the political domain. Men and women who will not sell their values and their commitment to statesmanship and truly representing the people for a mess of financial pottage, or simply to be popular, or to not go against the grain. It takes courage to do that in our present political climate. And this morning, I want to reference Thoreau again, because I think that when we look at the way our world is and the way our country is, we often look at the symptoms and not the underlying causes. And Thoreau says again, there are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to one digging at the root. We're hacking at branches so frequently and not looking at the causal factors. What Thoreau was saying is that we are engaged in desperate enterprises which seek to address our troubles without examining the underlying causes. We're looking at the symptoms, but we're not trying to discover or putting our energies toward discovering what is behind all of this. And I would like to suggest that there are indeed underlying causes or premises that sponsor the behaviors and conditions that we see in our world. And I believe that it will take courage for us to be willing to both examine and perhaps even discard some of our prior assumptions. Our primeval ancestors, and even some of our more recent predecessors within the last few hundred years, lived in a world that they drew certain conclusions about. There was a time in the known world of Europe and Africa and Asia, because they didn't know anything about these two large continents on this side of the world. And even the Bible that we often reference made no reference to this part of the world. In fact, the institutional church was a bit nervous when these expansionists and explorers would go out and start talking about this place on the other side of the world, because they said, well, there's no mention of this in our text. They thought the world was flat and that you would fall off the edge or be eaten by some gargantuan creature if you waded too far out in the water. They crafted cultural stories and developed ideas that were often very limited in perception, because they saw the world they were in as a separate entity from them. And when things would happen, they would conclude there must be something that's causing these things to happen, but they also concluded that it's not a part of us, it is separate from us. And that became kind of the theological foundation of much of even our present day religious beliefs. That there is some cause. 90% of the people in the world believe that there is some higher power, or that there is some cause, that we're more than a cosmic accident, we're more than flotsam and jetsam, a kind of disease on this planet, not soon to be cured, but that there is something about us and about our sentient existence that's greater than just our physiological identity. Most of the world's people embrace that thought. Native and indigenous people, on the other hand, on this side of the world, had crafted cultural stories that talked about the interconnectivity of life and all things. And even when it came to their food source, their cultural stories saw the animals who are a part of the environment as connected to them, and they would do things like go through rituals or even ask that animal's permission before taking it as a source of food. Now, we who have been impacted and influenced by the West dismissed all of that as nonsense, and we discarded a lot of those cultural stories that indigenous people brought to us. Much of what they contributed to the story of mankind was dismissed and discredited as savage and primitive. But more and more now, people are looking at those cultural stories and saying, maybe the indigenous people had something. Because even scientific inquiry is telling us today that everything in this entire universe, as far as we can see, is made of basically the same stuff. We brought moon rocks back from the moon, and when they examined them, they discovered the moon rocks have the same stuff in them that rocks on Earth have. It's the same stuff. Science talks about energy. Energy is a part of everything, matter and space. There's a kind of web of connectivity throughout the universe, and the cultural stories of indigenous people pointed in that direction. But many of us embraced theological notions that suggested otherwise. And so, as I talk about this multi-dimensional kind of courage, I'm going to refer to something that William Shakespeare said in one of his plays. He said, "There's more in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophies." There is more to this than what we presently understand. There's more to it than what meets the eye. There's more to it even than our traditional theologies and cosmologies. There's more to this. Our religions and philosophies have given us both priceless wisdom and, through perhaps our failure to grasp the deeper meaning, tragic absurdities. Our religions and our theologies have given us a worldview that suggests there is an entity responsible for our existence, but that entity is over here and we're over there. It's a part of our primeval deposit. And human beings like Linus and his blanket don't readily give up the comfort of those cosmologies and theologies. But one of my mentors, Neil Donald Walsh, said, "Is it possible, just possible, that there are things about ourselves and about life that we don't understand, the understanding of which would change everything? Is there more to this than we presently know?" And it takes a very special kind of courage to even be willing to consider such a proposition. I've had conversations with people and they will just shut down. They say, "Well, no." And that's not pointing a finger at anyone, because I believe, as you do, that each soul walks its own path. But many of us are not even willing to entertain the notion that there may be more to this than we presently embrace. The division and violent destruction of human life springs forth out of our ideas about who we are relative to each other and relative to all things, because I believe that if we had the courage to listen to the scientific inquiry or the scientific information that tells us we have a symbiotic relationship with nature. Nature sustains us. We are connected. And we can't just abuse the earth and plunder its resources, because those resources sustain us. And the way we treat nature comes back to us. We can't just poison our air and our rivers and do things to the environment at large. And recently we had this storm, this super hurricane that came to Florida. And there's pain and tragedy that came out of it. But I think one of the culprits we can point to, and scientists tell us, that our deposits in the environment, the things we've done that create what we call global warming, has something to do with a lot of these super storms and things that are happening in our world. And it's because we sometimes do not have the courage to say, maybe there's something to this, that there's a lot more symbiosis here than we thought at one time. It takes courage to reconsider, rethink, and even let go of many of our prior assumptions, especially when it means considering the possibility that our predecessors were not inerrant. Some of us cannot begin to grasp or to embrace the idea that what we consider sacred and those we consider sacred were not perfect in their understanding. And to have the courage to say, maybe they didn't get all of this right. Maybe the world isn't flat. Maybe there isn't some gargantuan creature out at sea who will grab your ship and swallow it up if you go too far from shore. Maybe our comfort zone with the things we've embraced is insufficient. It takes courage to do that, because when you do that, you're liable to wind up like Galileo Galilei, who said to the Inquisition, according to what I have seen through my telescope rather, it's the universe we live in is not geocentric. It's heliocentric. The earth is not the center. There's a big sun out there that is the center, and the sun doesn't revolve around us, we revolve around it. And there are other planets out there. And the Inquisition said, you are trafficking with the devil. He was an idea hero. You're trafficking with the devil, and you must renounce this. And they forced Galileo Galilei to recant his statement and placed him in prison. And then for the rest of his life under house arrest, because he had the courage to say, it's not geocentric, it's heliocentric. And we've since learned that not only is the earth not the center, it's one of the smaller planets in our solar system. And our solar system is one of hundreds of thousands in our galaxy, the Milky Way, which is one of the smaller galaxies. And they are suggesting now that there might be 1 trillion galaxies in the universe. But sometimes when we don't have the courage to admit, maybe I don't have it all, maybe this is not conclusive, maybe there's more to the story, maybe Shakespeare was right, there's more in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophies, Horatio. But it takes courage. It takes courage to be more universalist in your thinking and theology. Because somebody's going to say, oh, you believe all that hocus pocus stuff. I'm going to stick with this. And not to suggest that we have the right or we're in a position to challenge or judge anybody's belief system. But this is just a suggestion that maybe I can get more and add a larger point of reference to my cosmology and theology. I submit to you, we see our world as a place filled with entities that are disconnected, so many of us. yet have some interdependence and interconnectivity, but not truly intertwined expressions of a whole. We see that idea as kind of an esoteric thing. Yeah, we're together, but my tribe is a better tribe. My nation is a better nation. And better is one of the most dangerous words in the human vocabulary. I tell my students all the time, I say to them, no matter what you look like, no matter how tall you are, no matter what your complexion is, no matter whether you're male or female, you are not better, you're different. Not better. I say to them, I give them most simple illustrations like some people like oranges over apples. And you can say all day long, my apple is better than your orange, but doesn't necessarily make it. It's just different. And our life experience is filled with things that are different. And there are people who say, well, there is no God. I'm an atheist. Well, that's fine. You can say that. Because maybe the source of our existence is not some amorphous, separate being sitting somewhere in a chair with a gray beard and blue eyes and a club prepared to clobber us for not following ethical dictates within the context of being given free will, which is counterintuitive. It's like giving a dog the ability to bark and then punishing it for barking. But it's okay for the atheist to say there is no God because maybe God and life are interchangeable. You don't believe in God, you believe in life? Okay. Let's walk together in peace. You believe in your existence? A student said to me the other day, she said, my sister said, all of this is a matrix. None of it is real. And I said to her, I said, go back and ask your sister then what is real. Because unreal is a relative term. And in the absence of that which is not, that which is does exist. It's like a young man who got in my automobile one day, I was Ubering, and he said, well, the universe is filled with chaos. It's nothing but chaos. I said, well, you can say that, but you can't follow that to a logical conclusion. He said, why? I said, because you don't have another universe to compare it to. We live in a relative way. Everything is relative. In and out, up and down, over and under, short and tall, big and small, cold and hot. In the absence of cold, there is no hot. And a friend of mine said to me the other day, he said, well, yeah, where there's a clock maker. And I said to him, maybe the clock and the clock maker are the same. Maybe the clock maker is the clock. Everything is interconnected. We are interconnected, and there are examples of it all around us. If you put your hand in front of you, there are 5 fingers on the one hand. They are individuated, but they're not disconnected. They're part of one hand. If you've ever been to the seashore or the ocean, you can see thousands and thousands of waves ebbing and flowing. All those waves are a part of one ocean. They're individuated, but not separated. And I believe life gives us examples of our interconnectivity that we ignore. I believe life is always communicating with us. It's not a matter of whether life is communicating as much as it's a matter of who's listening. I believe that there will come a time when we'll have the courage to say, we're all tied together in a single garment of destiny, bound by an inescapable network of mutuality. And what affects one directly affects all indirectly because we're one. and the matrix and the illusion. There's some, I believe, substance to that, because there's a branch of science that says we create our own reality. So what we ingest or what we're interpreting has a lot to do with how we perceive. But can you imagine a world where we see each other as one? And we say and believe that what goes around comes around because we're connected. John Donne said, "In no man is an island, that each man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main." And then he goes on to say, "Therefore never sin for whom the bell tolls, but for thee, because we are joined together." And our individuation does not necessarily mean separation. And we have to have at least the courage to entertain the thought. Some of the most horrific things, and I will hasten to the conclusion, because I know that Universalists don't like long-winded Baptist preachers either. So, amen. But courage in this theological realm means considering that maybe what was given to us was incomplete. It doesn't mean we have to discard it, but maybe expand it. I think one of the things I read about the man called Jesus, and there are questions around the authenticity of a lot of it, but this particular reference I make is where he allegedly said, "I didn't come to destroy the law and the prophets. I came to fulfill them." And a better translation would be, "I came to expand and help you understand what that's about." All of us have heard the Sabbath story where they said, "Why do you let your disciples eat on the Sabbath day?" He said, "The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath." Those are teachings that I believe help us to understand that not only do we have free will, but we have a lot to do with the reality we create. And as sentient beings, like they said to me, they said, "So you believe that we can do whatever we want to do, and there will be no punishment for it?" I said, "Well, there are outcomes and consequences for everything we do. There's an outcome and consequence if you walk out in the road and stand in front of a car. That's not a judgment, that's an outcome." I said, "But it's not judgment in the sense that we're being punished." And I said, "Besides that, not only do I believe we can do that, but we do that anyway. When you think about it, we do whatever we decide to do. And I know that there are external forces that act upon us, but we decide how we're going to respond to those external forces. We're already doing what we decide to do. Whatever we believe, whatever path we're walking, we're making those decisions on. It's not, in my estimation, really the question. The question might be not, do you believe we can just do whatever we want to do? But the question might be, in doing that, what is it that we're supposed to see? Because if we say, and most of us in the world say, we want to live in a world of peace, a world of harmony, and we want prosperity, and we want to care about our neighbor, that's what most of us say. But when we look at our world today, there's something wrong with our conceptualizations of each other and the life we're experiencing, because that ain't what we get. We're not getting what we say we desire. So then we must question even our belief systems. And it's not wrong to use a traditional expression, which in my estimation we made up anyway. We're always making things up. Made up 24 hours in a day, and then we discovered that we studied the universe and patterns in the universe, 24 hours thing won't quite work. So we had to add a leap year. So now we're seeing the universe is expanding, so that whole mathematical thing, we make up things all the time, man. And when we start talking about ethics, that's a moving piece. Because we used to burn people at the stake because they were what we call witches, and we decided, well, that ain't too involved, so let's move away from that. And then ethics sometimes depends on geography. In one place, something is considered illegal, and then you go to Amsterdam, it's perfectly legal. So we must have the courage to say, is there something we are missing? Is there something about our theology and our cosmology and our sociology that we need to re-examine? Maybe it's larger than what we think. So I invite you, I encourage you to be a hero, to have courage to question things and ask life questions, because I believe life is quite capable of answering them. And it's not so much that life doesn't answer questions, it is who is willing to hear what life has to say. The great poet, Maya Angelou, wrote a poem, and in the poem she said, our greatest fear is not that we're colossal beings. Our greatest fear is not that we are less than we are. Our greatest fear, I would paraphrase and say this morning, is not that life is something to be afraid of. Our greatest fear is that life is too good to be true. That somehow the cause of our existence, whether you call it Allah, or Jehovah, or God, or Elohim, whatever you call it, our first source designed this in such a way that we are supposed to be enjoying this adventure, and we made it accomplish. And we're here for each other. Said to someone the other day, I said, we stuck together like glue anyway. We're eternally stuck together because science tells us that energy can neither be destroyed or created. We made energy. So then what happens to this? That's a name we give it. We made that term up. Where does that energy go? Where does it go? Can't be created. And even that thought is scary to some people. No. But it is what it is. Galileo, you're wrong. The earth is the center. And that wonderful human being stood before the Inquisition and said, I was wrong. The earth is the center. And then in 1992, a Catholic bishop finally removed his name from the list. Just 30 years ago. Is there something about life and about ourselves that we don't understand? You understand? Shame everything. The universe is on the right track. But even in the largeness of your ecumenical outreach, Universalists cannot take the attitude that ours is a better way. Ours is another way. And if you find your peace here, rest in it. That is so hopeful. We're more connected than we think. We're indivisible at a much higher level. And we have the courage that we want. But you can't talk about men and not talk about women. We've done that too long. Who said there's something called a jumping gene? And they said to her, you're crazy. And they wanted to commit her to. And then many, many years later, they had to give her the number. They called it jump science. Oh, but if the world could embrace our oneness, we can see that we're individuated but not separated. We have the courage to say every rabbi, every priest, every imam would have the courage to stand up and say, ours is not a better, it is another. The world would go through a cataclysmic shift over it. But we're so busy being separate, we can't see our lack of separation. We can't see that we're not. And there are examples all around us. When we believe we're one, our world will change, because you know what? I think, and I refer to the man called Jesus because in the Western world, and there were other masters, Jesus was not the only one who was a spiritual master. There are others, Buddha and Muhammad, there were others. But he's the one that most of us are most familiar with. He said, love thy neighbor as thyself. Guess what? Your neighbor is you. Having a difference. We're one. See, like apples and oranges, pears, we're all fruit different. But that does not mean we're separate.